Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Q&Play, my monthly Q&A series where I answer your questions in a rambly, unscripted format. The first question comes from Archiel Diem. What real-world inspirations have you taken for your games? I myself have adapted a lot of content for my games from things I learned in courses I took on ancient architecture, mythology, and history/archaeology. I myself take no such courses, so I can't say I do the same. I don't take much inspiration from real-world stuff, if I'm going to be completely honest with you. If I do take inspiration from historical events, it's not because I learned about it in a historical context, it's because I learned about it from a mostly fictional piece of media, like taking inspiration from Japanese history, but from Ghost of Tsushima, not necessarily because I was researching Japanese history specifically. I was playing that game, and I thought it was cool. A big part of my first campaign's lore, and I suppose my second campaign's lore because they're in the same homebrew world, but anyway, point is, a big part of my lore is inspired by Arminius, a famous figure in both Germanic and Roman history. However, I did not learn about Arminius from a history class. I learned about him from the show Barbarians on Netflix, which I don't believe is fully historically accurate, but hey, I thought it was badass. Historical content outside of historical fiction like The Last Kingdom or the aforementioned Barbarians and Ghost of Tsushima, outside of that, it's not really my forte. I'm not watching a lot of documentaries on like the History Channel, which now that I think about it is probably a terrible example because those guys don't really cover history, but you know.
Hey, the History Network wants in on this. We're news too, only news told much, much later.
Besides the point, fiction is where I take the vast majority of my inspiration because fiction is what I'm consuming the most often. Honestly though, I don't really think it matters too much where you take your inspiration from as long as you think that it's fun to do so. As long as you are engaged, as long as it makes your campaign better, that's all that really matters to me. Question from Plantmaster222. Here's one I find interesting. What's your opinion on making items/events/transformations/something else big purely for one character? Of course, making sure you do this for each party member. And how would you go about doing it? If you've seen Critical Role Campaign 2, I mean, you have a really good benchmark and a really good view into how to do this properly. Matt Mercer does a great job at giving each party member of the Mighty Nine in Critical Role a big thing, a special moment, without making it feel spotlight hoggy for both the players and the audience. A big part of this is making sure that you're in communication with the players that you're doing these big events to. You need to make sure that they are at least somewhat aware of what they're sort of going after. Put a carrot at the end of the stick. Tell them loosely what's going on. Like, for example, going back to Critical Role, Ford knew about Uk'otoa. He knew about this deal that he made with his Eldritch Being, and he knew it was coming to some sort of climax. Of course, Matt Mercer probably didn't spoil everything that was going to happen, and Travis definitely shocked both the DM, Matt, and the rest of the table when he did the thing that he did at the climax of that story, but it was an epic moment that Travis, the player, knew about in advance. He knew that something was going to happen. Of course, his choice is what dictated that epic moment. But having communication and having awareness is important. You can't just spring something onto a player out of completely left field and expect them to respond appropriately. You don't need to give a player like a script or something like that. Don't railroad them and don't tell them everything ahead of time in like a spoiler post. But make sure the player is aware of the plot that they are a part of. Like Plantmaster himself mentioned, you do need to do this for each party member. I will say, I think you should make sure that the party members are interested. Some people, I'm not gonna lie, I have seen that some people have no problem just sort of sitting back and letting their story take a little bit less precedent and not having something as super impactful. I have seen that. Some people are just not ready for super dramatic roleplay plots, and that is perfectly okay. In my own game, there are degrees of comfort. Some people love that dramatic plot with NPC connections and a villainous bad guy for the player, all that stuff. And some party members specifically do not want that. That doesn't interest them. They're not quite ready for that yet, and that's okay. They still get an epic plot line, but it's not as involved. You know what I mean? You need to make sure that everyone gets something, and you need to be in open communication about what you're trying to give to the players, the story that they are a part of. Though make sure that the player does want this. They do want this plot line, and if they don't, then make sure to give them something a bit more manageable to the level that they're comfortable with. I think this also goes without saying, but one thing that bears mentioning is that when you're doing these quests that are personalized for a player character, you know, it's their arc, remember the rest of the party are there too, and they get to be a part of the storyline. Some of my favorite content from the Critical Role story arcs that I mentioned before that were specific to a player character was seeing how the rest of the player characters interact with that story, seeing how the rest of the player characters interact with Ford's reveal during the Ukatoa storyline, seeing how the other player characters interact with Jester's chaotic Traveler Con event. That is one of the big strengths of a party dynamic, a dynamic you're probably going to have in a D&D game where you're playing with a group of people, an ensemble cast, so to speak. Seeing these characters interact with each other, that is one of the coolest parts, and it's one of my favorite parts of playing Dungeons & Dragons. I've been considering homebrewing a Wild West style 5th edition setting, but something I'm struggling with is how to justify still having swords and such be usable in the world of firearms, trains, etc. Am I overthinking things? Could just be how my brain works, but I feel like I need a good reason that I'm struggling to find. The first thing I do want to clarify is that if you want a Wild West style game, specifically Wild West style, then there are plenty of awesome Wild West games out there. I think Brian Foster ran an amazing Undeadwood game on Critical Role with an amazing Wild West system that was so good. If you want a Wild West game, there are plenty of Wild West games out there. However, if you want a Wild West setting in an already established 5th edition universe, that's also really cool. I did the exact same thing and it worked out great. My players absolutely loved it. And the way we got over it was, I mean, honestly, we just accepted that it's fantasy. I just finished a fresh replay of Dishonored 2, which is a game that has swords, and most characters are using swords and magic in that game. However, there are also guns, grenades, shock mines, mechanical soldiers, modern-day cars and trains, and yeah, the setting is not really all over the place. I mean, I just described a large variety of things, but Dishonored has one of the best universes I have ever played in. Guns and magic are fairly rare. Most characters are using swords, and yeah, the game never really tells you why that is, and I never really thought about it because I was just taken away by the amazing universe I was playing in. Don't underestimate the power of just having fun. If your players are having enough fun, they're not going to notice inconsistencies like that. And of course, there are minor lore write-offs that you can do. I don't know what they did in Dishonored, but in my own homebrew world, I do have a Wild West type region, a western frontier called the Blighted Shore, where demon-powered cowboy outlaws dwell and scheme. And that region is basically the only place where guns were a commonplace thing in this homebrew world. The players found firearms in other places, of course, but the main place they saw tons of firearms was the Blighted Shore. And I built the region around that principle. I mean, why do these rooks, these outlaws, have complete control over this area? Well, because of their firearms. The firearms give them a very high amount of leverage. They can't really take on the rest of the world like an army because they're a gang of outlaws, a large gang that's well equipped, but at the end of the day, they can't fight armies, but they are strong enough and high enough in number, and they have good enough gear that they can hold down this western frontier and turn it into a lawless wasteland. There were a few more lore write-offs, like guns are hard to use. They require a lot of training that most people just don't do, and most people would just be more comfortable using a bow. Guns are too mechanically complex to be affected by magic, so they can't be enchanted with incredibly complex magical enchantments. Or guns are just expensive to make. Ammo is hard to come by. Stuff like that. I think Critical Role and Dishonored had a similar excuse as well. Dishonored and Critical Role, guns are hard to fuel. Like in Critical Role, you need black powder, which is hard to come by. And Dishonored, you need whale oil, which is also hard to come by. For all these reasons, it's sensible for a lot of characters to stick to traditional medieval weaponry. And finally, at the end of the day, it is fantasy. If you want to give some characters steampunk-esque guns or make fantasy cowboys, go ahead and do it. Just do whatever you think would be fun for you and your players. My players and I had so much fun doing our Wild West thing, and if you want to do the same thing, I totally recommend it. Question from some random dude. How would you improve as a DM? Any tips in case your campaign gets derailed and prevent forced railroading? Okay, so the way I really want to improve as a DM is to just manage more downtime. My campaigns are really go, 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 go. And I enjoy that, and my players enjoy that. We've enjoyed that sort of mentality where there's always something around the corner. But I want more downtime. I want more Stranger Things episode 1. You know, each season we have the first episode of the season where there's nothing crazy going on. There's no upside down. There's no psychic powers. It's just the first episode. We have normal high school stuff, and then we escalate. I need to get much better at that, and I have gotten better. The first session of our latest arc had a downtime session where the players could just relax, take a breather, and I want to do that more. As we start going into the third act of this entire campaign and story, though, I think it will get harder and harder. It's kind of hard to justify downtime when there is this insane, crazy, world-ending plot going on, you know? So yeah, that's a big thing I would do to improve myself as a DM. As for the second part of your question, I honestly think that communicating above table about what your limits are as a DM is perfectly valid. My players understand that if they want something big to happen in this game, they want some sort of specific kind of quest, I need to prep it first. Like, my players just recently came up with the idea of, oh my god, could we go whaling in this campaign? I mean, we're pirates, and I played Assassin's Creed Black Flag. Could we go whaling? And instead of saying, let's go whaling right now in this very session, let's go whaling, they said, Crispy, could we go whaling in the future? And I was like, yes, you can. You can do it in the future, because now I know to prep that. My players understand my boundaries because I told them. There's nothing wrong with setting your capabilities as a DM. I don't think your players should expect you to be able to pull out a fully fleshed out questline out of completely nowhere, but at the same time, you as a DM need to provide those opportunities for a choice, those opportunities to experience the adventure in their own way. It is an incredibly difficult balancing act. I'm not going to pretend like it's anything other than incredibly difficult, because it can be, absolutely. But I do think above table talk can help to curtail this issue. Question from CatandRobby Flores. If you're tired of playing your current character, is it okay to ask the DM to turn them into an NPC for a bit instead of outright killing them? Yes, I think that is perfectly okay, though I am not your DM. Maybe your DM, if they establish that they don't want that at the beginning of the campaign, they just want to kill player characters, or you keep on playing them, that's their policy, that's the way they run, then that's the way they run. I can't really see a DM doing that. I don't really think it's a big deal to have a player character just walk into the sunset, into the distance, and return at a later time. I would dissuade you from telling your DM to play your character as an NPC that's in the campaign a lot, like as a regular member of the cast, so to speak. Maybe your DM could do it, but I do think it's sort of, I don't know, bad form to expect your DM to be perfectly able to play your character just on their own. I don't know if that's great, but having your character walk off into the distance for a later time, that's fine, at least to me. But of course, like I said earlier, I am not your DM, so I do recommend talking to your DM about this, about your plans and what you want to do with the character in the future, and hopefully they're okay with your character walking off into the sunsets for later time so you can play a brand new player character. Question from Nicholas Adipietro. Nailed the pronunciation, great job, me. Have you ever said no to a player-submitted backstory? There's one that I probably should have said no to, or at least curtailed in some way, and I will regale this tale to you. So, I did a video for 10,000 subscribers where I talked about a problem player that I had in my first ever D&D campaign. Not my first ever D&D campaign that I often reference. That one is a homebrew game. The very, very first, the one that failed, was Curse of Strahd. And the Curse of Strahd game, well, some stuff went wrong, mostly because I had a serious problem player. And honestly, the more and more I talk about this guy, the more and more I realize, man, he's not the worst ever, but good God, there was some bullshit in that game that I still haven't gotten over, and it's been years. But anyway, point is, the backstory. So his backstory was really, really cool. It was the most involved of all of them, mostly because I took the time to write it out and give it a full-fledged write-up, because I overworked myself as a DM. He came up with all the ideas, and I just put them down in a little piece of paper, because I don't know why he wasn't doing that. I honestly don't remember. But point is that his idea for backstory was that he was the son of some wealthy sages that once ruled over a city, and then a black dragon came down, ruined the city, and now he's on a quest for revenge. I had just finished up the Briarwoods arc of Campaign 1 Critical Role, where Percy, a character in that show, does that basically exact same thing. Trade out the black dragon for vampires, and trade out the crappy wizard character for a much better character played by the legendary Taliesin Jaffe, and yeah, you basically have the same thing. So I thought that, yeah, this could really work out. I love the Briarwoods arc, and I think that we could do something like that in this campaign later on down the line. The problem is, the player took that backstory and used it to form main character syndrome, even if it was like a far-flung thing. This is one reason I respect Taliesin and Percy so much. Percy and Taliesin were not the spotlight until it was like their turn, so to speak. When they got to the Briarwoods arc, Percy took center stage. This was his moment, but before that, he wasn't constantly bringing up how he has to reclaim his lost city and destroy those who killed his family and all that, because it wasn't his moment yet. He saved that shit for later, and that's what made it so effective and also respectful to the other players. My wizard player was less like Taliesin and more like Orion. He was constantly bringing up this lost city, even though he has no business telling the other party members about this so early on in their relationship. But anyway, it doesn't matter. We're all new to role-playing. I was okay with it. My problem was how single-minded he was and how, like, brutal he was about it. He would do anything to get more power so he could kill this dragon and take back his city, even though he was freaking level 1. So he was trying to ally with Strahd, he was trying to screw over other party members, stealing magic items for other party members, all because, look guys, I need to take back my city and I'm gonna need this stuff to do it. And it really sucked. I mean, to be fair, I wasn't really doing much about it because I was a moron, but, you know, what can you do? I mean, a lot. I could do a lot. I was a DM, but that's besides the point. That's a horror story for another video, which I've already made. The backstory itself was not bad, but the way he utilized it, that was the problem. That backstory could absolutely work, but his mentality around it caused the game to be exponentially less fun for everyone else. This vindictive mindset he gave his player character just, yeah, that was not fun to play around. Alright, and that's where we're going to end today's episode of Q&Play. If you guys enjoyed, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then you can check out our RPG Horror Story series, where we cover the best of the worst of Dungeons & Dragons. And while you're there in the cards, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content right as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own questions or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment spirit guide to let me know you made it to the end of the video and to reference the game I'm playing in the background. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.